So thank you again for joining this session. My name is Melvin van der Veen. I work for the environmental and human rights organization, Both Ends, based in the Netherlands, and I'll be your host for this session. Now, we're joined here in what SIWI calls the most important World Water Week ever, with building resilience faster as the central topic. I believe that's absolutely right, as we're still faced with a pandemic amidst a global climate emergency, whilst also being far off track when we talk about achieving the Sustainable Development Goal number 6. As we speak, a quarter of the world's population lacks access to reliable water supply, and more than 400 million people will be affected by sea level rise and extreme weather events if we do not prioritize climate adaptation whilst cutting global emissions rapidly. You could argue that a crisis provides momentum to do things differently. Just think of the rhetoric that we heard when governments quickly developed COVID-19 recovery packages, and terms such as Build Back Better were being promoted. The International Finance Corporation already mentioned at the start of the pandemic that the water sector needs to be reprioritized after what they said, decades of underinvestment and lack of political prioritization of water. But in spite of the popular message that water is a critical element in preventing the spread of the disease, water was never a real priority on the political agendas. Now, more than 1.5 years down the line during this pandemic, we can conclude that our responses to the crisis relied largely on fossil-fueled business as usual. A recent study by the OECD shows that recovery packages are not set to deliver the transformational investments needed towards long-term objectives on combating climate change and other environmental objectives. While water utilities are struggling with declining revenue and communities are being hit hard by climate change, the OECD shows that water accounted for only a small portion of all COVID-19 funding and measures. Again, this stands in stark contrast with how we talk about water. Water is life, and the right to water should be guaranteed for everyone, irrespective of your gender, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status. These messages will be echoed throughout this week, as they have been for many years. But we all know that the right to water remains a privilege. Now, why is that the case? Together with our panelists, we will explore how power and politics, from the village all the way to the international level, shape this injustice of unequal allocation of the right to water. During this conversation, we listen to understand how concepts such as the right to water and justice are experienced and defined in different places, and how this relates to politics. Our objective for the session is that we will have a better understanding of the role that power relations and political choices have played in the unequal allocation of the right to water. We hope that today's session will assist you in reflecting on how you can make a difference in addressing power inequalities in your work, and which political choices you can make that shift power to ensure the right to water for all. For example, what should the prioritization of water mean in practice? By asking these questions, we intend to build a critical foundation for the following sessions of this seminar, in which the next one will focus on decision-making processes and the third one on building resilient institutions. Now, I would like to share with you how you can participate in today's digital room. We've now opened up a so-called word cloud, which you can see on Pathable, where you enter this room. And we invite you to share in just a few words who or what should be prioritized to ensure the right to water for all. You can share your input throughout the entire session. During the panel discussion, we can then reflect on the word cloud as it's being automatically generated and updated. We'll also be keeping a close eye on the chat box, and we invite you to write down your questions to our panelists in the chat box, because we hope to feed the discussion with some of your questions as well. Lastly, we welcome you to spread the message on Twitter, for which you can use the hashtags mentioned on the presentation slides. Now, I would like to introduce you to the moderator of our session. Dr. Shanur Hassan is a Bangladeshi academic who is now working at the section of International Development Studies at Utrecht University. Shanur works as a researcher where she focuses on planning and policy making for water and deltas in development cooperation. She is also the coordinator of the global research network, Diamonds in the Delta. In her work, Shanur seeks to open up discussion on what good policies and policy knowledges are and stimulate rethinking about how different actors can relate to each other and come together for sustainable development. All right, that's it for me. Over to you, Shanur.
Thank you, Melvin. Without further ado, I introduce, as you can see, me and Melvin are sitting on the same room. Without further ado, I introduce our first presenter, Pranita Bhusan Udas. Pranita is a Nepali water professional with an interdisciplinary background who obtained her PhD at Wageningen University on the topic of gendered participation in water management in Nepal. She gathered work experiences ranging from Hindu Kush, Himalaya in Asia to the Rocky Mountains in Canada for over the past 20 years. During this period, she contributed to the Himalayan adaptation, water, and resilience research at the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development and helped the Nepalese Ministry of Irrigation in preparing their gender and social inclusion guidelines. Currently, Pranita is a postdoctoral fellow at Thompson Rivers University in Canada. On behalf of the research team at the university, she will present the findings of the research titled, "What Can We Learn from the Rural Youth?" The research is led by Associate Professors Dr. Bonnie Fournier and Dr. Tracy Christensen, and the team is furthermore comprised of research coordinators Shannon Desbiens and young researchers Lene Weigel and Ria Little. Pranita, the floor is all yours.
I'm Pranita. On behalf of the research team at Thompson River University, I'm here to share our research finding. The title of our presentation is Rural Canadian Youth Eco-Anxiety. Anthropogenic activities such as the burning of fossil fuels, water and land manipulation for infrastructure development, commercial agriculture, industrial expansion, etc. have disrupted the natural processes. As a result, the Earth has become ill, a scientifically proven fact on global warming and rapid climate change. Increased events such as fire, flood, cyclone, drought, heat waves, and the sudden extinction and emergence of new species such as COVID-19, as many scientists claim, are some of the symptoms of the illness. What Can We Learn from Rural Youth is a youth-led, arts-based participatory action research project carried out to understand and facilitate positive youth development in two rural communities, Kimberley and Ashcroft in the province of British Columbia, Canada. Youth were engaged in the research for 3 years through art-based methods to identify issues that matter to them. When youth were asked about opportunities and challenges or things they appreciate in the community and things they would like to change, water-related artifacts and water-related challenges were on the top of their list. They feel proud to live in a place where youth adventure on the river, mountain, parks, and hiking can be achieved easily by walking out their front doors. Waterfalls within the rural town was also highlighted as a matter of pride. Issues on environmental degradation, incidents of fire and flood, snow cleaning were prime concerns. Kimberley youth expressed their concern through art, some of them to highlight. One youth painted cruise ship dumping sewage in the ocean causing water pollution. Another painted Garbage Island. Another painted disappearance of coral reefs. One of them painted a picture of Greta Thunberg, pioneer of Friday for Future movement, to highlight how far youth voices are being heard. One painted a picture with expression of sound, ah, to express youth mental health, representing anxiety, fear, and distress. In Ashcraft, youth discuss incidents of fire and flood they have experienced. Here are some of their voices.
My name is Rhea, and I just graduated from Desert Sands Community School.
My name's Lene, and I am a current student at Desert Sands Community School.
This first photo was submitted by one of our youth participants, and it shows the property damage that was created after a fire was let burn due to administrative boundaries. The community is now left with grief and loss, and the damage that remains is a reminder of the natural disaster. This is a home in one of our communities that was destroyed by a flood. The house is now left abandoned and is a source of grief and unease amongst the community, as it is not only a reminder of the disaster, but is a safety hazard for the community.
The mouth is a positive and natural spot where the Bonaparte meets the Thompson River. It is a place youth can gather, swim, and have fun in a natural environment with water. This is the swimming spot in the river where youth used to come and gather for a fun, safe place to hang out, as there is often little to do in their small communities. Now this riverbed is...
Unmute yourself.
Here I go. Yeah. What the youth were saying is they explained some of the natural disaster, flood and fire related issue in their that they have experienced, and then after that they have come together from this youth from two different places, and they have discussed they have analyzed what is the main points and main issues emerging from this research, and one of the things that come out is their anxiety and their kind of helplessness that they see with the things that is happening around. And in the conclusion of our research, what we say is that, you know, rural youth have a strong connection with water and environment, and ongoing power and politics around water and natural resource management and rapid changes in climate do have impact on psychosocial development of rural youth. So involving youth as an active force in climate action needs careful consideration of their psychosocial development. And we would like to acknowledge our individuals and organizations who has helped in our research. And we also have, I think our video will be shared later. We have provided a link to where the youth had expressed their concerns through music video in Ascraft. The link is there, and I hope our audience can view those later. Thank you. Yeah, I think with this, my time for this presentation will go.
Pranita, thank you for drawing your attention to the underlying anxiety and the concerns in our young generation. I'm curious to know from you, what are the consequences of such eco-anxiety, both at the individual and societal level?
Thank you, Sanor, for your question. What we see is that one of the impact of climate change is either too much water or too less water. So too much water leading to flood, and too less water leading to water scarcity to the extent of drought. Two dimensions that I would like to highlight here is that at the moment, only referring to our Canadian youth, is that what we see here is that during natural disaster, initially people experience sadness as they experience abnormal environment around them. And as it prolonged, then emerge worries and anxiety, followed by then grief and loss as the disasters start affecting lives and livelihood. And being in such environment for longer period, experiencing loss leads to experience of shocks and trauma. So this is with the people who had experienced their first-hand experience of disaster. But also youth expressed, they have heard the news and things about climate change through media, through classroom discussion, and there are more of a negative talk around it. And negative talk around is like things not going well around us. And that is creating anxiety. And moreover, such issues they see are beyond their capacity to handle and address, as the problem appear to be caused by macro management of resources, whether it's water or whether it's about financial aspects that goes around, you know, managing water, and or about prioritizing water for what. So rural youth also feel the difference between their livelihood and their lifestyle and the urban lifestyle, and who is to be called responsible for, you know, the anthropogenic impact of climate change. So some of the solutions they propose are mostly the two solutions that they highlighted. I would like to highlight here. One is going green, and another one is reducing consumeristic behavior. So they highlighted consumeristic behavior is also the one of the the reason for either using water abundantly, extensively by one group and other having a scarcity. And last way forward from our research is that constructive youth engagement is a way forward to reduce their anxiety and stress, because after every meeting at the end of our 2 years journey, you did express that when they frequently meet the people of their age group, it has helped them a lot on reducing their dilemmas and stress. Yeah, thanks, Sanu.
Thank you, Pranita. Hearing you, I think when in future we discuss more and more about the climate change impacts, perhaps it would be good to address this underlying concerns, that is what you term as eco-anxiety, the growing eco-anxiety in our youth, in our future generations. Thank you, Pranita. Now it is time to invite our second presenter, Mr. Zahin Shams Shakkar. Zahin is working as a program development specialist in a national NGO called Uttaran in Bangladesh. He is a Chevening scholar and completed his master's on climate change and international development from the University of East Anglia. Zahin is passionate about the coastal rivers and coastal people. His expertise lies in water governance in southwest coastal Bangladesh, focusing particularly on tidal river management, ecosystem-based adaptation, and drinking water crisis. Zahin currently leads 2 projects regarding water governance and WASH in southwest Bangladesh. He also has extensive expertise on disaster risk management and climate change in southwest Bangladesh, and designs and leads projects for Uttaran regarding this issue. Zahin, welcome to the session. I would request you to unmute yourself.
Thank you so much.
And can we have Zahin's presentation?
I am Zahin Shams Shakkar. I am from Bangladesh, working in a local organization called Uttaran. At the root of all major water problems, power and politics play a vital hidden role. We look at the dying rivers, which is visible to the eyes, but we cannot see the political failure and an imbalance in power which leads to such conditions. In the 1960s, the southwest coastal region of Bangladesh went through a massive ecological change. As we constructed polders all across our southwest areas, we constructed to protect ourselves from flooding and increase our agricultural production. We did enjoy the revenue, but this event leads to a series of new disasters for the southwest coastal region. Polders disconnected the estuarine brackish water rivers from their floodplains. Unlike rivers in the Netherlands, our rivers bring tons of sediments, and those in power, they did not consider this local knowledge or local expertise. They also ignored the local governance system that was here. And this resulted in sedimentation of the river. Slowly, our rivers got silted up, clogged, and died. And since the 1980 till now, over the last 4 decades, we have lost around 60 small canals, large rivers, small rivers, and tidal estuaries in our area. The drainage shortage resulted in a new chronic disaster called waterlogging, where our land, our houses remain under dirty, polluted, stagnant water for more than 6 months. Now imagine if you are a woman living in these conditions when you are in your menstrual cycle. Imagine if you are a youth who has no future here, you're living in these dreadful waters without any solutions. However, the government of Bangladesh over the 4 decades have taken multiple approaches to solve the problems, and they were aided by their Dutch partners. Their technical support was provided by them. We again see an imbalance in power and politics. Their approaches were non-participatory, like in the 60s. Not only the state departments, large-scale financial institutions like the Asian Development Bank or World Bank also fund such processes, giving more power to the already powerful and ignoring the plea of the powerless, ignoring their voices, ignoring their knowledges. This results in millions of dollars being invested but yet no results or positive results are not being seen. Locals here have used their indigenous knowledge and are using an ecosystem-based approaches to solve the waterlogging crisis. In the 1990s, the local here, identified a new system called the tidal river management, through which we could not only solve the waterlogging crisis and also but revive dead rivers, like exactly the way it is now on my right. Uttaran and Pani Committee has facilitated this process since the 1990s. We are working to shift some balance. We are building a connection, a bridge between the state and the people. And we are shifting some of the balances, some of the powers to the local people, increasing participation in government processes. However, the progress are slow. I heard that even to shift a small embankment in the Netherlands, you need to concern the citizens and the users. Unfortunately, the same Netherlands government, when they try to implement their projects in Bangladesh, dictates their opinion on us, on the government, ignoring the local needs, making the users more powerless. Water governance discourse in the world has shifted in recent years. From a very top-down techno-bureaucratic approaches, the world is shifting towards a more participatory approach. Bangladesh is also in this train. By shifting some powers to the people, by making our process and projects participatory, we can go forward. Given we have recently developed the Bangladesh Delta Plan 2100 with the aid of the Dutch government, I think it is of utmost important, not only for us, but also our development partners like the Dutch government, to increase participation, to help shift some balance, and to promote a citizen control approach to solve the waterlogging crises of Southwest. And thank you so much for hearing me.
Thank you, Zahin, for your intriguing presentation. You made me thoughtful because I also come from this, my home country is also Bangladesh. So I could relate to what you were saying, and I was being, you could perhaps feel the emotions here also, seeing those rivers. So I was thinking, I'm curious, do you think it would be effective if we use events like Stockholm Water Week, where many water professionals like you and me gather together and we discuss a lot about different water problems. But do you think we can use the sessions to draw more examples of what is happening in the grassroots, what solutions work or not, and to think of more efficient ways of managing water resources?
Thank you for your question. I know that, as you said, that many water managers, engineers, and experts are listening to our conversation today. It's only been one or two since we have, realized our water governance. We are studying on it, building large ones on our rivers, calling it great innovations. At the same time, we are also innovating environmentally friendly and ecologically suited technologies to solve our water problems. But in all of this, we seem to forget that the real water managers, the users who have been managing our waters and rivers for thousands of years, we have ignored their knowledges, and we have also ignored the local governance system. Each river basin, each ecology has their own knowledge and has their own indigenous management system. And as managers, engineers, governors, and experts, it is our duty to identify such techniques and use our knowledge and sciences to come up with effective and efficient solutions. Fuse them up. TRM, the tidal river management in Bangladesh, is one such case, one such example. To do that, we need to increase participation, by which I mean effective participation, where citizens have the control. Let them decide, and we can facilitate. The Dutch government, as I said in the video, has the perfect example in their country. At the end of the day, community people are the one who we are working for. And therefore, it is best if we use our sciences and for communal benefit, and everyone efficiency in the way we are managing our water. Therefore, I urge all present here, again, all professionals, water professionals present here, to focus on increasing participation of the community and the need to build on community knowledge and expertise in living in harmony with the nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Zahin. Hold on that thought. And I would like to welcome Violet Matiru, our third panelist of this session. Violet Matiru is the founder of Millennium Community Development Initiatives, a local organization that promotes community-based solutions to pressing environmental challenges in Kenya. Through her work, Violet has worked together with communities and community-led associations such as Water Resource Users Associations, particularly focusing on the Ate River basin for almost 15 years now. In doing so, Violet has co-designed and implemented community environmental projects, which include the construction and management of water, sanitation, and hygiene projects. Besides the community work, Violet has worked as an independent natural resource management consultant for both Kenyan and international agencies for over 20 years. Violet, it's my immense pleasure to welcome you. And as you are listening to Pranita and Zahin, I'm curious to know, how do political choices distribute the right to water in the community you work with?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation to come and discuss this issue of water and politics. Just to give a bit of a context, within Kenya, 80% of our country is classified as arid and semi-arid. So the large percent of the country has water scarcity. And within this setup, you have Nairobi, the capital city, actually taking up a lot of water. Right now, the capital city destroys 2 watersheds because more than 90% of its water it gets from the Tana River, which it brings hundreds of kilometers away. And then that water is polluted and then it's dumped into the Athi River watershed. So the city has a very big strain, and it is actually an issue of power and politics. And it goes back to what Zahin was talking about, that power and politics started right from the colonial times, when there are 2 dams which I'll use, which illustrate the power and politics with regard to water. They are called Roiro dams. There is Roiro 1, which finished construction in 1950, before Kenya got independence. And it was specifically to get water for the capital city, Nairobi, for the European settler community. During that time, the natives were not prioritized. The Europeans were prioritized. So water was brought to the city. And from that time, this water, up to today, the communities living around this dam do not have access to water, piped or otherwise. They are actually treated like criminals when they go to get water from the river. So you then come to the second dam, which is being implemented with the funding from the Deutsche Bank, which is owned by France and Germany. And this is bringing in more water to the city. But this time around, it's coming at a time of shifting power, because in 2013, there was devolution where we now have 47 counties. With these 47 counties, there's now pushback. Kiambu County is asking, why take all this water to the city in Nairobi County when we have also cities, upcoming cities in Kiambu County? So this kind of pushback is assisting in the negotiations. So, and this is, the issue is also points to the issue of rights and responsibilities, like Pranita was talking about. Much as the city people get a lot of water, they then don't treat the water with respect. You find a lot of wastage, you find a lot of pollution, yet these same people demand more and more water. They have a sense of entitlement, and this is destroying rural communities upstream whose rivers are drying up, and then they are not being able to meet their basic needs. So the issue of public-private partnerships has come in as an issue which is causing more and more of these imbalances. And we'll talk a bit more about that later.
This is quite interesting, Violet. Zahin was emphasizing on inclusiveness and more active participation. And what you mentioned about stakeholder consultations and public-private partnerships, what has been the effect of these consultations and this kind of public-private partnerships in the allocation of rights to the water?
Yeah, many times public-private partnerships are being touted as the solution to the major water challenges, especially because water infrastructure is expensive. So our governments, most times, they look out to get funding from international financial institutions. But the downside of this is that you have these international financing institutions. Their way of doing things is very top-down. They will normally work with consultants. I know I work as a consultant myself sometimes, but sometimes consultants who only come and collect information without really explaining to the communities the implications of even their responses or the implications of the data that is being collected. And when we've been doing our research around Roiro Dam, both the first dam and the ongoing negotiations, there's been a lot of misinformation, lack of actual information coming to the communities about what exactly is going to happen. What are the implications of the flooding from the dam? Will it occupy more land? So there are lots of questions. And also, even when you have the technical documents for these dams, they are extremely technical, and most people cannot understand what they are talking about. So what we have is that international financial agencies have a lot of power in our countries, and that makes them not listen to communities. They ignore indigenous knowledge systems like Jahin talked about. And this happened from the colonial times, and it's happening even up to today, where our voices as local communities are being ignored. But this is changing as communities get more access to information and are able to also participate in decision making.
I think this is the time when I would like to invite Zahin and Pranita on board. And I would like to know from all three of you, how do you interpret the right to water? And maybe we can take the floor alphabetically. That's the easiest, I guess. Or if anybody wants to speak first, please go ahead. Zahin, would you like to?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think the right to water, if we look at the definition, it means it entitles everyone to have access to sufficient, safe, acceptable, physically accessible, and affordable water for all personal and domestic uses. It's an important issue that we all work together to solve. However, still globally, we have 1.1 billion people who lacks access to water, and a total of 2.7 billion people find it difficult to gather water for at least a month of the year. The problem is much more intense when you compare it between our rural areas and our urban areas. In all major cities across Bangladesh, since that's where I live, water is provided by the government for drinking and domestic purposes. I used to live in Dhaka a couple of years back, where I used to get water for €4, all-purpose water. That includes my drinking water and also my flushing water. However, I shifted to Satkhira, which is the southwest coastal part of Bangladesh, and now I have to pay around 1.25 taka, that is like 1.5 taka that a day for a liter of water, which is around 5 to 6 euros for drinking water for a month. So you can imagine the differences, and that is not right to water. Yet when I buy a packet of crackers in Southwest Bangladesh, when I buy a packet of chips or cracker in where I live now, it costs the exact amount if I'm buying it from Dhaka as well, meaning that I'm paying the equal amount of VAT and taxes for that one as well. Women here who cannot afford to buy water like me. They have to travel around 2 to 3 hours a day, spending nearly 18% of their lifetime in just for fetching waters for their family. And now, is that right to water? No. And climate change is only going to make it difficult and to intensify such problems. So, and therefore, right to water should also mean that that access to water is equal and universal at the same price for everyone across the country. It also means the ability to take decisions regarding how we manage our waters, how we manage our waters communally. And again, as engineers, experts, and governors and political leaders, our role is of a facilitator, as innovators, and to provide guidance, to encourage participation. It is universal and it is a basic human rights which should not be marketable. Thank you.
Thank you, Zahin, for drawing our attention to the inequalities and the question of justice when we discuss about access to water, and also trying to give us a comparison between the rural and urban landscapes in distribution of water. Pranita, what would be your thoughts? Pranita, can you please unmute first?
Am I there? Yes, am I there? Thanks, Anur. I've been thinking, and it's a very important question. So thank you for that. Water right is a basic human right. Nobody denies that. And it's a universal right. And when we were talking about earlier, when we say basic human right, we usually see water for drinking water, for survival. But I would like to highlight keeping in consideration of the gender perspective on water is how important for women, not only for drinking. Of course, in addition to drinking, sanitation matters a lot. So we have to, what my thoughts about when we define water right, right to water. I would like to highlight that when we define water right in a practical sense to make use of it for improving well-being of everybody, we need to think in a very contextual manner, because the problem arising from either too much of water or too less water determines the possibility for people to live or not to live. For example, too much of water, the flood causing death it's very much very equivalent to someone dying from water scarcity. So in a climate change context where we see disaster is, the water related disaster is increasing day by day, the definition and problem related to water varies from context to context. I just wanted to give you a global perspective with highlighting for instance, the drought, how the drought matters for a developing country and developed country. For instance, if we say in South Asia, when the water scarcity is there, it affects drinking water because the pipe water supply or a government public water supply are not in place as in a developed country. But some of the developed country who is experiencing a prolonged drought now, for them, a fire is a big issue affecting their livelihood. So water for what? But ultimately is for living and for survival. So that contextual matter has to be there. And second is water always adds to power base, and the power and politics around water matters on affecting, interfering someone other's right. So the responsibility component has to be integrated very much in when we talk about water right, responsibility, and politics with ethical values. That's how I see it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Pranita. Indeed, rights to water is more beyond not only about the drinking water crisis, but it also addresses and encompasses a lot of other issues that not often we always talk about. For example, the gender rights and who decides and for whom, and how someone else is not getting their rights while we provide access and to water to some others. So Violet, would you like to share your thoughts?
Okay, I think for me, the right to water, to me, it is a political statement. It is a political statement that is made by politicians who really don't internalize or want to internalize the implications of people getting water, especially for subsistence. The reason why I think it's a political statement is because water is also a highly valued commodity. So you've got those two forces pushing each other. And it gets to the point where private sector feels a sense of entitlement to water because in their minds, economic development is more important than poor people getting access to this highly prized commodity that they, in their minds, don't seem to value. So I think once we understand the implications of actually making a commitment to getting people to get some right to water, at least for basic subsistence, we'll be able to then know that it is expensive. We'll be able to know that we need to balance very powerful forces which want to push aside the poor and the powerless and to marginalize them even more. And this, unfortunately, is the scenario in which the international financial institutions come and operate in. For example, in Kenya, there's a very highly controversial study that was funded by the World Bank, and it was it's titled "Financing Municipal Water and Sanitation Services in Nairobi's Informal Settlements." And this study entailed the switching off of water for communities living in Kibera, the slum area of Kibera. And it was for them to be able to understand the willingness to pay of their land, of the landlords, of these people living in these poor shanties. So to be very honest, private sector does not have problems making money out of the poorest of the poor. That is the reality. And unless we empower poor people to fight back against private sector, the right to water will never be actualized. So if this is a political discussion, it needs to be treated that way. Otherwise, that right to water can never be actualized.
Thank you, Vale, for that powerful statement that rights to water indeed is a political discussion. Here, I would like to check with Melvin. Melvin, in the Pathable, how the audience are reacting or responding?
Yeah, thank you, Shanur. You hear me now, right? Don't you? Yeah. You do, finally. So a lot of input has been given on the word cloud already. It's generating and updating the whole time, actually. Water is the biggest. So water is the biggest, and we also got a very interesting question. And to not take too much time, I think we need to go immediately to that question and ask that one to Jaheen. Jaheen, we got one interesting question to you specifically from Sofia de la Rosa. Her question is, what role do you think international partners like the Dutch government can play to promote participative, just and fair water management in the global south? And I'd like to ask you to integrate your answer to that together with your wrap-up answer. So maybe you can tell us which political choices should be made for the future to ensure the right to water for all, and also tell us then what would be the role for international partners like the Dutch. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you so much. I'll go with the wrap-up first, and then I'll integrate that with it. So our path is like very clearly defined. If we read the IPCC 6th assessment report, which just came out a couple of weeks ago, it's a global consent. It's not a matter of political choice anymore. I think it's very clear that the things that we need to do, it's clearly written in there. And SDG 6 is also there, which is our current political choice. However, we are very, very far away from our goals. Look at COVID-19. Look at the vaccination program against COVID-19. Is the global north having the 3rd dose of vaccination program? Well, where there are billions in the south who still haven't had their first doses of vaccination. I'm lucky that I got my first dose. Therefore, our choices are clear: to invest and help those in the rural areas, and particularly in the hard-to-reach areas across the globe. Invest in technologies such as which reduces the amount of water uses, or which compromises indigenous knowledges to help our problems and all. When you talk about right to water as a human right, it should not be, as Violet said, it should not be about, it should not be privatized, it should not be marketable. Rather, it should be an universal product for all. It should be available for all. It's a human right. You cannot market a human right. Therefore, right, and it's not only about drinking water. It should be about domestic livelihood and ecology as well, as Pranit has said. And we need ecosystem, and our ecosystem needs water. Again, I reinstate that participation should be increased, and that brings up the question of Sophia, that in order to increase participation, there are policies. It's not only about making policies, it's about believing in those policies. We developed the Bangladesh Delta Plan in Bangladesh a couple of years ago, where there are 9 Dutch organizations making it, and only 3 Bangladeshi organizations were in this process. There were 9 Dutch organizations who were making this. And but it could have been done the other way around. It could have been brought up from the people. It could have been bottom up. It could have come up from the people. So the approaches should be promoting bottom up approaches, listening to the people, let them decide, give the plans. Do not write the plans in English because we do not understand English. Do it in the native languages so that we can give our comment. So that we can tell that we do not like that part, we do not like this, but that's how you increase effective participation. If you block the room for us, then there is no problem. I am one of the few English speakers in Bangladesh. Not all of my farmers can speak English like me. So that's how you should proceed. First, make it in native languages, then increase participation, take it from the bottom, then our consultants can come and fix it up. Thank you. Thank you so much for this very nice sessions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zahin. Pranita, as Zahin was sharing, what political choices can or should be made in relation to rights to water? What are your thoughts on this? Pranita, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, no, I was thinking of the participation part of the whole discussion going on, because I also keenly looked into the participation part of gender participation in the whole water sector development. One of my thought is I fully agree with Jahin on making things in a local language, because communication and language matters a lot to be a active participant in the politics. So local language, local communication is very important. And beside that, I would I would really like to highlight the ethical dimension of the whole thing. So often what happens is that the power and politics and how you lead the society towards enlightened society, so that dimension comes with only when the justice and ethical values integrate in a society. So as a development partner, I will really have because I come from Nepal, and my last work is very much following understanding gender vulnerability along a river basin in Nepal and India, in the Gandaki River Basin. And it's such an enlightening experience to feel how people day to day live in the different insecurities and how it feels your every moment is insecure. So to help them with our, as a development professional, either as an international development partner or in the national, working in an NGO and INGOs, or as an academician, the very important part is now a need is to cultivate ethical and gender justice, all the ethical aspect of being a human being and thinking about life between birth and death. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Pranita. Violet, before you share, Melvin, your Bluetooth speaker, you have to take care of it now. Violet, before you share your thoughts on political choices that can or should be made, there is a question for you. Melvin?
Yeah, thank you so much, Shanur. Okay, so there's one question from the audience to you, Violet. What can advocacy partners do to ensure that political leaders internalize the needs of the poorest for a sustainable WASH? And how can we strengthen the relationship between people and their elected leaders on WASH? And maybe you can integrate this question in your wrap-up answer. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I'll try and integrate that question in my wrap-up. So basically, I think one of the ways we as a society, because we are now a global village, it really is now a reality, more so even after COVID. We need to go back to looking at some of the indigenous knowledge systems that valued this right to water. Like in our traditional communities, nobody could be denied water for domestic use. And in Kenya, in a county called Elgeyo Marakwet, there's some pre-colonial irrigation systems that were established by the communities. And now they've even been recognized as UNESCO World Heritage Sites. And that is where communities with their systems, their traditional systems, learned how to share water for irrigation, for domestic use. We need to go back to that. And in addition to that, I think one of the things that when we do advocacy, we need to also take responsibility. As, for example, in my country, we as the Kenyans who are educated, we need to work with our communities to ensure that even when development, quote unquote, development projects are coming in, we are there assisting our communities to even understand what is this technical document saying. Because we have engineers from these communities, but when you have communities dealing directly with World Bank consultants or consultants from some French consultancy firm, and there's no Kenyan who is technically well versed in that topic to help break down this information, then you'll have communities signing pieces of paper that they do not understand the implications. So this responsibility goes several ways, including on us as the Kenyan educated people. We need to start knowing that World Bank, IMF, they don't have solutions to our communities. We need to work with them to design solutions for our communities, and for especially in the water and sanitation sector, because this is a critical sector that affects so many others.
Thank you, Violet. And thank you, Zahin and Pranita. Melvin is indicating that it's time to wrap up our very exciting panel discussion. Melvin, do we have any burning question from our audience for now? All right. Then I would like to wrap up this session. If we look back to our presenters, to the presentations and the discussions we had with our panelists, I would like to reflect from those discussions and presentations 3 aspects. First, our panelists highlighted that specific technical solutions and project-based interventions that influence distribution of water rights in the communities they belong to or work for. And those solutions, as we can see, originated elsewhere, often did not acknowledge existing practices, as Pranita, Violet, and Zahin all were saying, and the relevant knowledge of the targeted communities, and were implemented from top down, as Violet indicated what happened in Kenya. From the panelist discussions, we could also see that power and politics actively influence the distribution of water rights, but we hardly talk about when we address distribution of water. Rather, power and politics are considered as something that should be confined to formal decision-making spaces, like a parliament or a formalized water committee. And the problem that I see in doing this is this makes water problems appear as something technical and apolitical. This practice and development supports labeling of some technical solutions as best practices that has an universal applicability, while it By doing this practice, what happens is at the same time, the rest of the solutions are labeled as local or traditional. So in development, when social, cultural, languages, ecological and political contexts are not entirely acknowledged, and the major focus remains on technicalities and economic efficiency, I would say such development often inevitably favors some over others, as Pranita was also emphasizing. The next point that our panelists emphasized were the power relations and political choices. These are not just of local or national in origin and nature, but are also global, as Zahin explained. The decisions related to how water will be distributed and who will have an access to it are often influenced as well as justified by actors from outside of local or national politics, who often represent bilateral trade and development partners and agencies. So I would say from our discussion, we can consider three take-home messages. First, making distribution of water political again and placing it on top of the political agenda. And for this, I would say that we the water professionals or who deal with water should not be shy away from talking about power and politics. Instead, we understand socio-ecological, cultural processes and the underlying social political relationships and the roles that these processes and relationships can play in water distribution and rights. The next take-home message that I would like to highlight is the careful and empathetic listening to others and courage for self-reflection when discussing issues like water distribution and aspects of right, equity, and justice. Nurturing empathy and self-reflection would create room for joint learning and collaboration and would support many such conversations that we are having today on related topics that goes beyond water, but are importantly related to water. For instance, some of our panelists was emphasizing on the topics on climate risks and justice, development goals such as SDG 6, and gender rights. Here, I would like to acknowledge our panelists and audience for being part of this conversation today, because I think we can consider this session as a major initial step for developing such empathy and listening to each other. Last but not least, I would echo with Pranita, talking about ethical and justice dimensions of water distribution. We, the water professionals, need to engage more and more with the community that we belong to or work for, especially with those who feel neglected and unheard in accessing and managing their own water. To do this, I would suggest practices and knowledge of the communities and their social and cultural contexts should be acknowledged. This helps to acknowledge that there are more interpretations of rights to water and distributions of water, as indicated by our panelists today. And doing this would help to critically engage and create a sense of solidarity and connectedness. And only then a change in future can happen that we aspire today in our discussions. I would wrap up here, and I would give Melvin the floor to you again.
Thank you so much, Shanur, for wrapping up this important discussion. And we actually allocated some time for Henk Oving to close the session, but unfortunately we ran out of time. So thank you all, to the audience, to the panelists, for this very inspiring session on water in politics in water, or the politics of water. And please join us in the next session tomorrow at 5 o'clock Central European time, where we'll be talking about the decision-making processes when we talk about inclusive water governance. So thank you all so much, and we're looking forward to continuing the conversation tomorrow. Thank you so much, and goodbye.